Hey everyone, so this might actually be the final installment of my traditionalism cycle or egalitarianism cycle. And yes, I'm changing the name once again. But this time it's because a lot of new information has come to my attention. I've done a lot of reading, I've done a lot of thinking, and I've actually come to a somewhat disappointing conclusion. But I'll get to that when we get there. So in the last couple of videos where I talked about RK selection theory, and a lot of people have pointed out in the comments section that I'm taking too many liberties with the theory. I'm trying to make it fit in a situation or a scenario where it wasn't meant to fit. For example, in RK selection theory, you basically have different species with different sorts of reproductive patterns, different levels of paternal care, all kinds of stuff. There's a lot of things feeding into it. As I mentioned in my previous video, humans are a K species. We're simply looking at these different behaviors through the lens of evolutionary psychology and trying to establish patterns in other animal species. However, I didn't know this at the time. Special shout out and thanks to Stardust for bringing this to my attention. Apparently this is on the Wikipedia entry for RK selection theory, is that RK selection theory has been basically overtaken by another theory called life history theory. And the thing about life history theory is it's not necessarily a replacement and a repudiation of RK selection theory, but it builds off of RK selection theory. So it took what was good about RK and built on it and made it more robust. And I want to kind of go over what I've learned and how it fits into the larger scope of things. So the main difference between life history theory and RK selection theory is that there are 3 points instead of 2. It's not black and white. There's 3 actual phases in this cycle. So it doesn't really start anywhere in particular, but you have 3 phases. You have periodic, equilibrium, and opportunistic. Now, these are based on the life cycle habits of fish. So you're thinking, wait, what fish? How does that have to do with anything? Well, fish are very adaptable because they can migrate. They can move around. They can not change their environment the way humans can, but they have a lot more freedom than, say, an animal that's more or less restricted to a single environment. So here we have 3 phases in the life history of these animals. So they're designated, and I'll show you this slide. This slide is taken pretty much directly from life history theory itself. The red text is mine. It's been added based on what I've read about life history theory, but I've taken as few liberties as possible. Some of the language used in the original text is very scholarly, so I've tried to break down what they're saying into plain English for the average layman. So that's what the red text is. It's to explain in as little space as possible, trying to make it as simple as possible what life history theory is all about. So just starting at opportunistic. An opportunistic phase happens because the environment becomes very unpredictable. There are drastic swings in both resource and mortality factors, meaning that there's population and resource scarcity. And when that happens, the population becomes opportunistic. And the defining characteristics of an opportunistic society are low child survival, low fertility, and early sexual maturity. Now let me define what sexual maturity means within this context. I'm not talking about having sex, I'm talking about having a family. When someone decides that they're ready to actually have a family, whether that's early or late within their lifetime, that is considered their sexual maturity. They could be sexually active earlier than this, but if they're not doing it to actually reproduce, they haven't reached their sexual maturity at that time. So from the opportunistic phase, we reach a transition, and this transition is based on predictability. They're basically adapting to their environment. They're trying to thrive within a fluctuating environment by predicting when these transitions will occur. And this leads to what is known as the periodic phase. Now, the periodic phase is identified through low child survival, high fertility, and late sexual maturity. Now, from the periodic phase, you enter the constant environment. And this is the environment where it says, quote, increasing resource stability, competition, and predation. So the environment is more or less stable. Resources are fairly abundant. So you're going to have a more or less steady population as well as steady resources. So this leads to the equilibrium phase. And in the equilibrium phase, you have high child survival, but then in response to this population explosion, you're going to have lower fertility. And of course, late sexual maturity. People are going to basically have less children later in life because the children are surviving. And then eventually the environment will become less predictable, more chaotic, the resources will become depleted, and then we will go back and start the cycle all over again. So you can see how this relates to fish, but how does this relate to human beings? What's interesting is as I was reading and beginning to understand life history theory, it clicked along with my egalitarianism cycle theory. However, you'll notice that this theory only has 3 phases, whereas my theory had 4 phases. But I actually think 3 phases is more appropriate. My 4th phase was the economic collapse phase, but it's not really its own phase. It's really the transition from the 3rd phase feminism to the 1st phase patriarchy. So let me go over my revised theory incorporating life history theory. So we'll start in the lower left. Now this is patriarchy, not like patriarchy in quotes, which is, what feminists complain about when they complain about patriarchy, but an actual patriarchy like you see in the Bronze Ages or the Dark Ages, where women were the literal property of men. So in a patriarchy, you have low child survival, you have low fertility, and you have early sexual maturity. This is also defined, and you'll see this in blue. These are basically my own thoughts and additions. You're going to have male and resource scarcity. You're going to have reproduction being prioritized, and you're going to have polygamy, which is a form of tournament mating, which is an R strategy. And if you want to know a modern example of this sort of patriarchal environment, an actual no-shit patriarchy, you really don't have to look any further than ISIS. ISIS is going around killing men, raping women. They don't give a shit. This is what a patriarchy is. An actual patriarchy, not the patriarchy in quotes, which I'll talk about in a minute. Now you'll notice at the top I have patriarchy in quotes. In other editions of this theory, I've called it gynocentric traditionalism or egalitarianism. Both of those terms have a lot of baggage. I'm going to have to define my terms either way, so I'm just going to call this air quote patriarchy. And the difference between an actual patriarchy and air quote patriarchy is in an actual patriarchy, women have no rights. They are the literal property of men. Men could pretty much do whatever they want with them, and the women have no right to object. So it's very harsh for women. In air quote patriarchy, men still have more authority than women do. They still have some authority over women, but women are largely protected. It's actually a very balanced society. The women have fewer responsibilities and the men have more responsibilities, but the men also have more authority commensurate with their responsibilities. So from the patriarchy stage to the air quote patriarchy stage, we have economic growth. And you have the population develop patterns to work around the environment, like migration or nomadic culture. This is when civilization begins to arise. In an actual patriarchy, just like you see with ISIS in the Bronze Age and the Dark Age, it's a very primitive society. There's constant warfare, there's constant male scarcity, there's constant want for resources. People fight over the few available resources. It's pretty dark, it's pretty violent. As humanity develops civilization, you enter this second phase. This second phase is defined by male stability. Now there still may be scarce resources, but the men have more or less stopped murdering each other every day. Now from this point, survival is prioritized. And here you see the beginnings of monogamy or pair bonding, which is a K strategy. You still have low child survival simply because civilization takes a while to catch up. You're still going to have plagues and famine and all that stuff. So you're going to have a higher fertility rate and you're going to have later sexual maturity. So this is the quote-unquote patriarchy, where modern women believe they were oh so oppressed. They really weren't. It was actually a very balanced society when you think about it. Now Karen Strawn has called this a soft patriarchy. I'm not really sure what I should call it. Whatever. I'm really bad at naming things, so I'm just calling it air quote patriarchy. Soft patriarchy is another alternative. Gynocentric traditionalism. I'm not really married to one term or the other. So from the air quote patriarchy stage, we have the beginnings of the welfare state and socialism. And from there you have population and resource stability. And now there's more competition as the population increases. And now you reach the feminism phase. And in the feminism phase, you have high child survival, low fertility, and late sexual maturity. You now have male and resource stability, and you have incentive-based reproduction. So you're going to have single mothers who are responding to economic incentives, as well as MGTOW, who are responding negatively to economic incentives. Now, eventually, these developments lead to a societal collapse. So you see this with the environment becoming less predictable. You see the population and resource scarcity emerge, and you revert back to a patriarchal system. Now, this is disappointing to me for a number of reasons, because I really wanted to find some sort of solution where a patriarchal system could be maintained in order to avoid slipping back into a feminist system, which would then lead to the collapse of society. However, and this was partially based on the work of C.S. MGTOW in a video called Calories, Epigenetics, and MGTOW, where he states that the growth of society is tied directly as a causal factor with a decrease in testosterone. A pair bonding system is important for society, but then you creep ever so closer to a feminist takeover of that society. A decrease in testosterone led to an increase in monogamy and pair bonding and an increase in development of civilization. However, this can also be taken too far, as you see with bonobos. Bonobos are once chimpanzees, and they developed a more egalitarian society. The men became more effeminate, they were dominated by the women, and as a result, they became smaller and dumber. For example, chimpanzees can use tools while bonobos cannot. So, simply the decrease in testosterone doesn't necessarily increase intelligence. It has to do with the environment. In fact, I believe that the decrease in testosterone and the increase in pair bonding is not a cause, but a result of increases in civilization and intelligence. Now I need to get to the disappointing aspect of this. I feel a bit almost like a protagonist in a Lovecraftian novel, where if you're familiar with H.P. Lovecraft and a lot of his stories, you'll have the protagonist stumble upon some knowledge, and that knowledge will drive him mad. And I feel like by looking into this theory and learning about it and questioning it, I've basically come to the realization about how natural and futile it is to resist, which is very disappointing. I'm not going mad, but I'm just very disappointed in the fact that we really can't change this system. So we as human beings respond very predictably to our environment. And this is both good and bad. Right now, we're in the feminism phase. There's just no question about that. However, feminism doesn't necessarily have to take the form it's taken in the West. You see these markers appearing in different societies everywhere. For example, high child survival, low fertility rate, late sexual maturity. That doesn't necessarily have to describe Western feminism. You see this in Japan. Now, Japan has a very gynocentric system as well, but they don't necessarily have an organized feminist movement. There's not like manspreading and stuff like that going on in Japan. However, they are experiencing low fertility, high child survival, and as a result, their society is going to collapse very soon because of these factors. Even areas where socialism, quote unquote, seems to be working, such as Sweden and in Scandinavian countries, they have low fertility rates. They have high child survival, and they may say, oh, we're so happy, but you can't maintain that society long term with those factors going in. So their society is going to collapse as well. So the sad thing is there's nothing we can do about it. So as we go from a very unpredictable, very violent and warlike patriarchal system to a more balanced system, the more success we have economically, the more we have available food, the more we have less physical threats, the more peace we have, the more peaceful our society becomes, the less people are starving and being murdered and being killed in war, the closer our society comes to collapsing. As soon as the threats are removed, we enter the feminism phase. I mean, the fact is, women use men to help them survive. Women can't survive on their own. This is why you don't see any matriarchal societies in humans, because humans are a sexually dimorphic species favoring the male. Because men have to do all the things, women can't form a society on their own. They need men. However, once men accomplish their goals, women don't have that sort of sense of honor and love to reward them for their hard work. As soon as they've outlived their usefulness, women basically drop them. And they do this through feminism. They do this through villainizing masculinity, the very things which built the society. And as soon as this takes root, the society begins to collapse. You're undermining your own foundation, the foundation of your society. You're undermining it by attacking men. However, you really can't undo it, because this is an environmental response. This isn't something you could, even if women could, in theory, understand logic and reason, and you could actually rationally explain this cycle to them, I don't think they would even go for it then. But the fact that they aren't rational or reasonable just proves just how futile this is. This is an environmental response. As food becomes more accessible, as warfare becomes more rare, as fewer people are dying, as women don't fear for their survival, they immediately turn on men. And the welfare state simply speeds this process up, because it gives women a way to survive without even directly needing men at all. And, you know, I guess coming to this realization is good because it allows me no longer to worry about it. What we should be focusing on is warning people who may be brainwashed by traditionalism that we're living in we're not living in that phase anymore. It doesn't make sense to live like we're living in the previous phase when we're in the feminism phase. The way to succeed in a patriarchy isn't the same as how to succeed in an air quotes patriarchy or how to succeed in a feminism. These all have these are different environments with different qualities which lead to success or failure. So I think one of the main things MGTOW can do is just educate men. Look, don't get married. Stay away from women. This is no bueno. Stay away. Not good times. And then beyond that, just prepare for the collapse. You know, prepare yourself financially, physically, mentally. The collapse is going to come, probably in the next couple decades. If you make it out of the other side of that, you know, we'll take it from there. I don't know what's going to happen. Chaos is, by its very nature, unpredictable. But once we come out of the other end, we'll have to rebuild society. And my original goal was to try to inform and educate men to help guide, hopefully, the development of that new society. But now I see that it's really going to just be a repeat of what we've done before. And there's really no way to break out of that. So fuck it. So we'll come in after the collapse, we'll rebuild, we'll subjugate our environment like we have done 1,000 times before. We'll reach the pinnacle of progress, and then we'll collapse. You know, it's like the Reapers in Mass Effect, and I know I've used this sound effect before, but it's worth repeating.
Confidence born of ignorance. The cycle cannot be broken. The pattern has repeated itself more times than you can fathom. Organic civilizations rise, evolve, advance, and at the apex of their glory, they are extinguished.
Yeah, it's kind of disappointing. I wish there was a way. Maybe there is. I mean, let's put our heads together and let's think about it and see if we can come up with some sort of system that can work long term, where the society doesn't have to collapse. But if you consider it from an environmental perspective, the more successful a society becomes, the closer it comes to collapse. And you see this, and there's nothing we can do about it. There's nothing we can do to stop it. So, but those are my thoughts. I'd like to hear yours. Let me know in the comment section if this makes sense, or what you would add, or what you would change. Anyway, this is Turd Flinging Monkey. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.